Otherwise, I'd have to bring you down to earth too. I know this verse hurts you. I tell you what, I give you advice. I'm feeling nice. Your vices could influence your writing if you weren't biting. Y'all trying to be people that.
All right, welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. This is your host, MagMongoSlade. Let's talk about Lashley's open challenge. Keith Lee answering that open challenge. Keith Lee getting wrecked. And then Bill Goldberg coming out and saying he's next. All right, so Lashley said he ain't got no more to say. He said everything he had to say in his wreckage of Kofi Kingston. MVP still had words, though, and said that Kofi was a statement and that anybody who's disrespectful to Lashley is going to get a similar treatment. So then he opened up the floor to a contender. And because we haven't heard Keith Lee's theme song in forever, I had no idea who it was. I was confused. And then out comes Keith Lee. So now we got to talk about Keith Lee. So Lee comes out looking the exact same as when he left, which was a surprise to me and completely not good. Because I thought that Keith Lee was going out to lose weight. He came back. It was about the same size. He hadn't really lost anything. So was it really a health condition? Was it an injury and they didn't want to talk about it? What was it? What was going on here? Because I expected when Keith Lee come back, he was going to be in a lot better shape, but he was still kind of in the same shape. He was still a chocolate mountain, but whatever. I was excited to see Keith Lee versus Bobby Lashley. It's been a while since they tangled. And Lashley just went in there and put the strong-armed Keith Lee in what is, in a way, is not in any way indicative of the Keith Lee character to get just mauled by Lashley the way that he was. Now, look, I am a big Lashley booster. I am. Huge Lashley booster. Still didn't like this. I didn't like this because I like Keith Lee too. They could have a competitive big guy match. Why not have somebody that, that Lashley can throw around and beat the hell out of? It could have been Cedric Alexander. And Cedric Alexander, because we know that they have history. And Cedric can say, look, I wasn't done with you. I'm here to prove myself. And then he could have wrecked Cedric. Why use Keith Lee in this situation? They use Keith Lee in this situation because they know Keith Lee. For starters, it's a big debut. It's a re-debut. And that gets people talking, oh, Keith Lee's back, yay! And then 3 minutes later, it's like, ooh, Keith Lee came back and he got mauled by a grizzly bear. What's going on here? Didn't do Keith Lee any good. But, as I said before, wins and losses are just storytelling devices. They're telling this story with Lashley that he's this unbeatable, unstoppable beast man. The entire point is that they're fattening him up for the slaughter. That means everything that they're doing is just going to be negated in a couple of months when somebody stands toe-to-toe with him and beats him. That's the nature of this character that Lashley is playing. I just hate that Keith Lee was one of those guys. Just like I kind of hated that Kofi was one of those guys. I would like to see, competitive matches sometimes. But not all the time. So from a perspective of a Lashley fan, which I am, this was great. Lashley got to go in there and wreck some guys. Put Keith Lee down. Great. We can always blame it on Keith Lee's having some time off. And saying, hey, he was gone all this time. It was a little ring rust. Wasn't expecting Lashley to come in as hard as he was. Okay, we can headcanon this way of explaining this thing and hand wiping it some other time. So I'm glad Keith Lee is back. Not happy that he's still in the same shape that he was in and didn't come back in better shape. But I'm glad he's back. And hopefully they actually do something with him now and not just say, oh, yeah, you were back. You got defeated by Lashley, crushed, and then that's kind of it. And now you get thrown to the back of the line. And with now that they have Cross on the roster and Damian Priest on the roster, you do have to ask the question, where do they fit? Like, legit, where do they fit? Like, Keith Lee benefited from being one of the bigger guys in NXT. And Cross benefited from being one of the bigger guys in NXT. Then you come up to the main roster, and there are guys like Lashley there, and there's guys like Roman there, and there's other guys who are not small on that roster. So things are going to be a little bit more competitive, which means you're probably going to do more jobs. And like I said, in WWE, you have to play the long game. You know, it's sometimes the game is longer for some people than it is for others. You know, Lashley worked very, very hard to get to this position where he can crush a guy like Kofi and crush a guy like Keith Lee, and it be completely believable, and we don't get too mad about it. You know, like I said, what did I say? When did I say this? I think it might have been SmackDown review when I talked about how Lashley did those jobs for Finn Balor, who was half his size. You know, and quick jobs too. Because at WrestleMania, he got beat by Finn Balor in like 3.5 minutes or something like that in dominant fashion. Not in a roll up with his foot on the ropes, but the Demon straight up crushing him and taking the Intercontinental title from him. You know, people kind of forgot. People kind of forgot. People were kind of like, well, nobody says like the guy who Finn Balor beat in like 4 minutes is the world champion, and now he's just beating the hell out of everybody. He's gonna fight Bill Goldberg. Nobody thinks like that. And, you know, like, and plus, you should know, transitive property does not work in combat sports. Transitive property, for people who don't know, means if A is greater than B and B is greater than C, then A is greater than C. That's not true. It's true mathematically. You know, if 2 is greater than 1 and 1 is greater than 0, then 2 is greater than 0. That's true. It's not true in combat sports. It's not true in, like, let's say, boxing. People have tried that forever. A good example of people using transitive property in combat sports and looking like assholes. George Foreman. George Foreman beat the shit out of Joe Frazier. Beat the shit out of him. Joe Frazier could not stand toe-to-toe with George Foreman. And people said, well, Muhammad Ali couldn't beat Joe Frazier. How could he beat George Foreman? He can't. Lies. He beat him. So, in convincing fashion, even though he kind of, rope-a-dope is not illegal, but it ain't exactly, you know. Anyway, he won. That's the point. And that's transitive property. You know, it doesn't work in combat sports. It doesn't work in sports, period, if we're being honest. So that thinking, I saw people doing that kind of thinking. They were like, oh, well, how could it doesn't work. In any event, let's move on. Let's talk about Bill Goldberg. So Lashley proved his dominance after wrecking Keith Lee, who is, you know, no pushover. He has some credibility. He hadn't been beaten that often. Hey, let's back up for a minute and talk about Keith Lee. Remember when Keith Lee beat Randy Orton? That was interesting, wasn't it? That was interesting. We thought that was going somewhere. It didn't. You know, that's why you can't take wins and losses that seriously in wrestling. Maybe back in the past you could, because people, but you know, I think too often, you know, the folks who read the newspapers and, you know, the Jim Cornettes of the world, they think everybody cares as much as they do. When I think most people were just kind of like just going out to see the matches. And, you know, they weren't really all that interested in, you know, this guy being undefeated, even though, you know, him being undefeated probably helped him a little bit. But that doesn't mean that anybody that goes undefeated is, you know, 100% interesting just because they were undefeated. It just doesn't work that way. And we see that even in boxing. You can, or other sports. Just because you're undefeated or you have a good record doesn't mean that you're a draw. Doesn't mean people are interested in you as an MMA fighter. Brock Lesnar. Remember when Brock went to the UFC and he won like 2 fights and everybody was like, the dude is 2-1. Why are you giving him a title match? It's like, and Dana White was like, money. Like, he fills my pockets. So I'm going to give him a shot. And then fucking Brock won. And everybody was like, oh, oof. Didn't see that coming. You know, nobody did. And then he brutalized a couple of guys and then he lost. Anyway. These kind of things happen, you know, these kind of things, they take place. And Keith Lee beating Randy Orton. We thought, oh, he was getting catapulted into the main event picture. He was going to win the Royal Rumble and all that. And no, none of that happened. None of that happened. So he's still trying to find himself. All right, now let's move on to Bill Goldberg. Because I didn't expect this video to be 10 minutes. But then I went off on tangents. Bill Goldberg comes out there to challenge Lashley. And he says, I'm next. And Lashley is offended that Mr. Bill Goldberg got in his face and yelled at him, I'm next. Now, I've talked about Bill Goldberg already. See my previous Smart Tears edition of when Raw announced Bill Goldberg. When they announced, when it leaked. So, I won't talk about Goldberg and how him challenging Lashley doesn't make any sense. I'm not even going to go into that. If you want to hear me talk about that, I'll refer you to my Goldberg is back video, to which there is a Smart Tears cup in the upper corner, because I go through 30 minutes, 40 minutes or whatever of talking about how Goldberg and Lashley doesn't make any sense. I already went through that. So let's talk about, instead of talking about how it doesn't make sense, let's talk about how it benefits Lashley, right? So it benefits Lashley because Goldberg, despite what everybody said on Twitter, got a massive eruption when his music played. People were chanting for Goldberg before Keith Lee came out. People wanted to see Bill Goldberg. The internet tells you one thing. The audience tells you another. Ratings, merchandise, all that kind of stuff tells you something completely different. And that's why I try not to make, judgments off of one metric. Like, oh, TV ratings went up or down. It's like, yeah, that happens. Merchandise sales go up and down. Those things go up and down. Attendance, they go up and down. What's the consistency? What's the pattern? Right? And the pattern is Goldberg gets massive reactions despite the fact that people claim to hate him. More people order the events when he's on them. More people watch the show when he's on it. More people talk about the show when he's on it. Comic Book Resources had an article already up about Bill Goldberg and Lashley. They very rarely cover wrestling. Well, matter of fact, I think they do cover wrestling. If I remember correctly, they might cover it poorly because they cover comic books poorly too. But they cover it. So it benefits Lashley because it's his first high-profile program. It is a legend that is coming in to work specifically with him, and it's going to be a big name that goes on his resume. And that's what you want. You want a top guy to have a list of guys that he has beaten and their names matter. Their names mean something. So while it's great that you say, oh, we want to build up and have him wrestle Damian Priest, but when you say Damian Priest to the average person, they're like, who cares? I don't care. When you say, oh yeah, he beat up on this guy, they're like, who is that? I don't know who that is. And that was the significance of Kofi Kingston. Kofi Kingston being, the first African world champion. They did a good job of continuously reminding people of Kofi Mania and how big of a deal that was. So that when he gets killed, it's like, yeah, this new guy, even though he's not new, he was in the company before Kofi was. Okay. But even though he left for a long time. But that guy, he's the real deal. That's the point of all of this stuff. Wins and losses are storytelling devices. The stories that they're telling with Lashley now is that he's this unstoppable, unbreakable, unbeatable beast. And as long as they stick with that and don't have him losing stupid fucking tag team matches and other dumb shit, this thing will work. It will get over. Now, Goldberg just has to exist. They're trading on his name, which is what you do when you're 50 some odd years old in wrestling. You're not there to get pushed. You're there to get paid and to trade on your name. He's trading credibility and reputation on his name, And sometimes they have to do things to keep his name strong. Like, Undertaker did a lot of jobs in his later years, you know. Remember when that time when he just got obliterated by Kane? You know, they thought that was going to be the end of him. When as you get older, it becomes more okay for you to do jobs, but you have to maintain some level of credibility in order for those jobs to matter. Now, that becomes the question: should they have Goldberg? Now, I'll ask this question because I think they should. Goldberg should have a match on Raw in order to build up to his SummerSlam match with Lashley. He should have to wrestle somebody on Raw. It should be like John Morrison or somebody like that. You know, just so we can see how he moves the metrics on TV, and just so when his name will have more credibility later. You know, if you just have him, and maybe John Morrison's a little low on the list. I don't know who else it could be. I don't want to feed like a top level heel to him, but somebody like John Morrison would be perfect because he takes great bumps. You know, and he could dodge Goldberg a little bit and play cat and mouse. You know, so it's a good deal. But that's the thing. Goldberg is trading on his credibility. He's trading on his name. He's lost to Braun Strowman. He lost to McIntyre. His name is damaged a little bit. It's a little bit smudged. He needs to rehab his credibility a little bit. That was, of course, the purpose of him beating Kevin Owens. That was also the purpose of him beating The Fiend. Is he needs to have credibility in order to pass his credibility over to somebody else. It's basic storytelling stuff. I mean, in wrestling, when you are a fairly new talent, you don't have any credibility. Even if you've been around for a long time, you don't even have that much credibility in order to pass on to someone else. You know, that's why it doesn't matter for you to, when AEW does this stuff, they talk about, oh, we're building new stars. It's like, well, when they're just beating up on each other, you're not really building any new stars. You have to, in order to trade on credibility, you have to have some, right? You have to be like, oh, this guy's gonna murk this dude, and then he loses. You're like, whoa, wasn't expecting that, you know, and that helps make the new guy versus, oh, well, you know, neither one of these guys are known. Nobody cares about them. You put them in the main event, I guess that works. But what if I tune out before you get there? You know? But people are not going to tune out for Bill Goldberg. They're going to tune in for Bill Goldberg. And that's the benefit. Because you use the old guys to build up the current guys. And then the current guys can go make guys in the future. That's how it works. That's the passing of the torch. That's the death of the old gods. You bring Bill now, but you do need to establish that Goldberg is something. You have to bring that back. So I would like if they did something like that, where it was like a beat the clock sprint, where Lashley has Goldberg picks Lashley's opponent, Lashley picks Goldberg's opponent, and maybe in the first match, we see how, you know, who Lashley picked for Bill Goldberg. And it could be like Cedric Alexander. And Goldberg beats him in like 2 minutes. And then Goldberg picks like Humberto Carrillo or maybe somebody harder. Maybe, you know, Damian Priest or something like that to fight Lashley in the main event. And, you know, Lashley takes 5 minutes, but he ultimately beats him, but it takes him 5 or 6 minutes. And then we prove that, hey, Goldberg is not only a name, but, you know, he's a little bit more dominant than Lashley is. You know, he beat his opponent a lot faster than Lashley did. And that's a storyline you can go into SummerSlam with, where Goldberg hasn't lost a step. That it's not that Goldberg is washed. It's that Drew McIntyre and Braun Strowman was just so big and so strong and so young that he really couldn't overcome those guys. But Goldberg is still Goldberg at the end of the day. You know? That's the story they should be telling. Are we going to get there? Probably not. WWE is too stupid to do that. They're just too ridiculous. They're not going to do it. And plus, why bust? You know, I think if I was USA Network, I would pitch the idea for Goldberg to wrestle on Raw. I would pitch that. Why not? You know, why not? What's it going to hurt? It's not going to hurt anything. If anything, it could help. He's not going to injure himself because the match is going to go 3 minutes. It's going to be a showcase. The fans are going to love it. People are going to tune in to see it. Lashley and MVP can stand at ringside in their suits and grimace. Let it be that. And then Goldberg can laugh at, he didn't have to say anything, cut long promos. Just look at Lashley struggling to beat this opponent who's a tough guy who, Lashley wasn't expecting to be so tough. And, Goldberg kind of chuckles at him and says, like, you still got a ways to go. And then when we get to SummerSlam, Lashley just obliterates Goldberg. Just wrecks him. And like, nope, I'm the man. And, what's done is done. We did our job. And then when Big E comes in to cash in his Money in the Bank privilege on Lashley, toe-to-toe, and beats him head up, straight up, everything that Lashley has done will go over to Big E. Even though transitive property doesn't work that way, it's still a good thing. So that's my 2 cents on Bill Goldberg, Keith Lee, and Lashley. What do you guys think in the comment section below? Like, share, subscribe, donate via Subscribestar or via Cash App. Either way. Thank you guys for your time, and I will talk to you guys later, man. Peace out.
Old non-aggression. Once that lesson sets in, you'll see a session. But you got an affection for no progression, regression.